What's up, everybody? It's Cole again, and I'm here with my good friend and one of my business partners, Chris Hansen. Chris, tell me who you are, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, Cole.
Yes.
Chris Hansen. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, real estate investor since 2008. Hard money lending, single-family portfolio creation, institutional portfolio management, and commercial and multifamily specifically.
Okay, and he fits all that on one business card. It's just this long. But so Chris is going to come in. We're going to talk a little bit about hard money lending. He could have done this whole course, to be honest. But I figured we touched a little bit on hard money lending. And since he didn't tell you he was being humble, he actually started his own bank and is a hard money lender himself, which he actually just sold on Friday as of recording this video. It's a Monday. He sold on Friday. So this is his first day of like, what do I do now? Like, sort of retired in my 30s, kind of sucks, right? But of course, like everyone else, he's already going to start 10 more projects. But I want to start off with kind of how we met, and as a side note of how important social media is in real estate. So check this out. In 2009, I noticed that I could be buying houses in Phoenix, Arizona at the auction for 40 to 80 grand that had just been built in like 2000 to 2006 and sold as a new build for like 260,000 to like 320. That was a lot of numbers, but a house that was just built and sold for 300 grand. Unfortunately, in the recession, that family foreclosed on the house, and now 5-6 years later, I could buy that house for 40, 80 grand. So I was all in, and I bought my very first home at an auction. And as I was Googling the address of my home to just learn more about it and to do kind of what I've been teaching in this training series, all of a sudden, somebody tweeted about me buying my house and what I paid for it at the auction. And so I was like, well, who the heck is this person, right? So I clicked on the Twitter account, and it was Hansen Capital Group. And I was like, well, who the heck are they? And how are they involved in my transaction? So then I went to their website, sent an email like, hi, I bought this property today. You're tweeting about it. Who are you guys? And Chris wrote me back, and he's like, oh, we just tweet about what's happening in the market. We have nothing to do with your particular transaction. We just let our followers know what houses are selling for. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Well, what exactly do you do? And it turned out what his business did at that time, which I think you sold that one off too, was exactly what I needed. Living in Southern California, he at that time offered a full service turnkey, service for me to be able to remain living in California and be buying houses every day at the auction in Phoenix, Arizona. So the point is, we then went off to do dozens of deals together. We're still, to this day, great friends together, continue to do business together, and it all started from a tweet. So if you're not using social media, you need to, and then as you grow your real estate business, you're going to want to. So what I'm going to do is ask Chris a bunch of questions about hard money lending, how to get your hands on the money you need to buy your properties. It's going to be awesome. Enjoy. What's up? It's Cole and Chris again. What we're going to talk about now is what you as a borrower should be looking for in a lender. There's this misconception of people outside of the real estate industry that want to get in, that getting money is hard for a deal. If you watched the last video, Chris just told you, when you've got a good deal, finding the money is easy. I remember the first time I heard that, I wanted to call BS. So guess what I did? I tried it. I went out there and found a good deal, and guess what? I found the money. Fast forward 11 years, I've done that a lot of times. But now that you know that there's multiple options and a bunch of different places to get money, for us as borrowers, we really need to find the right financial partner, the right lender. So we're going to ask Chris what we as borrowers should be looking for in a lender. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that's a great topic. As we talked about, the good deals always find the money. Sometimes there's borrowers that look better than others. So as a lender, I'm looking for a deal and a borrower who, one, has experience, two, they don't ask me for money and then disappear. When the borrowers come through and ask for money, and I mobilize the money from our fund or some other funding source to fund their deal, if they flake, That's bad. It looks really bad. You've kind of got a one-time shot at a reputation with these lenders, and you want to treat them like a really valued partner, because that's what they are. If you show up and you say, hey, Chris, I've got a deal, I need $500,000 tomorrow, I can get $500,000 tomorrow. But if you cry wolf and you don't need it, that's not going to help as much. So one is look for a lender that you know can perform. You could do that by checking with your real estate associations and other things to make sure that this lender is a legitimate lender, has a lot of capital, can be there for you. And two, you want to start to shop their terms. Make sure they're within the market. Our rates change depending on who's borrowing. So if it's your first deal, the rate's going to be a little higher to evaluate my risk. If I've got a bigger risk, it's going to have to cost a little more. So one of the things is rate. The other is they've got capital availability. Third is timing. Fourth is reputation. All these things are going to be crucial when you're the borrower and you're going to find that lender. But when you've got a really good deal, you want to get a second opinion. You come to me and say, hey, Chris, can you give me a quote on this? I'm going to ask, who else are you talking to? What are you hearing? What kind of rates are you getting? Are you getting high LTV? Are you getting low rate? All those things are going to factor into what I end up quoting you.
Right.
So don't be afraid to shop lenders, but be very careful on not committing. If you say, hey, all right, Chris, I'm going to borrow the money. I need to close on Friday. I'm not going to be happy if that doesn't work out, regardless of the reason.
Nobody likes getting stood up on a date. No lender likes getting stood up on a loan.
So it's just extra communication. Hey, here's a deal I'm working on. I'm shopping it. If I know you're shopping, I'm going to be more competitive in what I offer you.
Yeah.
So transparency.
I was just going to say communication and transparency. So don't play games. Chris is in the business of lending money. He and people that are hard money lenders talk to, get inquiries daily, dozens of times, depending on the size of the fund, hundreds of times even a day. So you're not going to offend Chris if you say, hey, listen, man, I'm on the market for money right now, and I'm shopping, would like to talk about potentially doing a deal with you. Don't commit and say, hey, I need the money tomorrow, can you get it together? And then, like he says, flake. Because what I've found, and tell me if you agree with this, the real estate community is a lot smaller than people think. Yeah?
Oh, absolutely. And the lenders especially. In the Phoenix market, where we do a lot of our lending, we have all the top lenders. We're all friends. We're all in the same business. We're friendly, competitive. So I want to get the deal over you if you're another lender in town. Sure. But if you jerk me around, I'm going to tell the other lenders, hey, watch out for this guy. He gets us started a bunch and he doesn't perform. Or, a lot of times guys are trying to buy something that's been bought and sold a few times, double, triple escrows. I want to know that kind of stuff. And sometimes if it's a new borrower, I'll call and check, hey, have you heard of this guy? Do you know anything about it?
So just to recap, when you are shopping lenders, number one, communication and transparent. Just let them know, I've got my eye on this deal, or even I got it under contract. I'm calling you and I'm calling the others.
That's a big one, Cole. Don't shop the lender if you don't have control of the deal.
Yeah.
Lenders spend a lot of time underwriting and appraising property to see what we'll do. If we do a bunch of work and you don't have control of the deal, it makes you look bad and it makes us not want to lend you money.
Explain what controlling the deal means.
So you control the deal once you have equitable title or you have it under contract. If you've made an offer on a property and you don't have an accepted contract, you don't have control of the deal. It means you're shopping, you like it, but it's just like walking past a car dealership. I like that car over there. It doesn't really mean anything. Once you've agreed to it, it's in writing, the seller signed off on it, then come to your lender and say, hey, this is a property I'm going to buy. How much can you do?
I think that was a great analogy right there, because I think relating to buying cars is easy. Anyone can do that. He just said you don't walk past a car dealership and say, hey, I like that car right there, and then walk into Bank of America and say, can I have a loan for that car? You got to make sure that cars isn't as complicated as buying houses, but you need to make sure that car is even available and didn't sell to someone else and is still in the dealership, that isn't the owner of the dealership's car and it's not even for sale at all. You would want to make sure that that car is available, that you are going to buy it, and then go get the money. So when it comes to real estate, that's a really important thing that he said is don't go start shopping for money and wasting his time and resources and employees he's paying to start run numbers to consider whether they'd fund to you or not when the deal isn't even under contract yet. You have no control. Because let's say it takes a day or two to work with Chris and it's all green lights and they've said yes, then you go to make an offer on that property and the seller says, sorry, it went under contract last night. You've wasted his time, your own, and you look like an ass. So one thing I will say though is now you might be wondering, okay, so you're expecting me to make offers without even knowing if I can get the money? You're going to have a contingency period. I think we talked about this in an earlier video, or an escape period where you put under contract and let's just say you don't get any money at all, and Chris says no, and all the other lenders say no because it's not a good deal, you can still cancel and walk away without a problem.
Yeah, you brought up a good point there. So, one, if I say no, it's probably a really bad deal. Because I'm willing to lend on most things if you'll put money in. Then I know I'm getting it at a discount. But the other thing is, I don't want to scare you away from talking to lenders before you have it under contract, but just be upfront. Hey, I'm looking around. This is the kind of property I'm looking for. This is the type of deal I'm looking for. I'm interested in finding a funding partner. If you'd be interested in being my funding partner, I'd love to meet with you, tell you why I'll be a good borrower, and I know what I'm doing. If I had more borrowers call and set up meetings like that, they'd get our best pricing. They'd always know they had a funding partner ready, and I'd be there whenever they had their deal. So it's not that you can't talk to us before, but just tell us what you're doing.
Perfect. Okay, so I think that's good as far as for us as borrowers, what to look for in a lender. And what we really talked a lot of is kind of like etiquette, like how you should act when you're looking for a lender, and whether you end up using someone like Chris or whoever the fund manager or the lender or the owner is of that fund that you're going to be borrowing money from, whether you use their money on that particular transaction or not, you want to leave a good taste in their mouth, because I might get a second deal accepted tomorrow, right? Let's say you did a direct mail campaign and you've got the phone ringing off the hook and you ask Chris to look at a deal and for whatever reason it's not a fit, but the very next day you get another person that calls and says, take my house. You don't want to have pissed Chris off. So that's what to look for in a lender, like he said. Now let's go back and recap on those a couple. You talked about speed of money. Do you know what's beautiful about hard money lenders and private lenders specifically? You can get money in. How fast? What's the fastest turnaround you've ever done from inquiry to you giving someone money?
We do a lot of same-day lending.
Same day. That means at 10 a.m. I get a phone call and I'm like, hello, it's Cole. Oh, you are interested in selling your house? Oh, crap. Like, you're going to take the price I'm willing to offer? I hang up. Hey, Chris, can I have $800,000 today for this property that I'm buying for 1.4 and putting 200 of my own in, or whatever the numbers would be? He's going to say, sure.
Yeah, that's no problem. We're never the slowest component in lending. It's generally going to be the title company. So, we say funding in as little as 24 hours, but we do same-day stuff all the time.
So go into Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Chase, whatever, and say, hey, do you do same-day funding? And that's another reason why that's important. So when you're shopping a lender, again, you want to look at how quickly they can fund, like he talked about. You want to have open and transparent communication with them when you're shopping. And again, the big thing is, I think, remembering that it's a small community. So even though you might have called 5 different companies with 5 different websites with 5 different phone numbers, those 5 people may have just played golf together yesterday because they're all friends competing against one another in a friendly, competitive way. So,
one last thing you might want to look at when choosing that lender is, if your state requires it, make sure they're licensed. There's a lot of unscrupulous lenders out there. They've got really aggressive loan documents or other things that can kind of take advantage of the non-savvy novice borrowers. You want to make sure and work with somebody who's licensed.
Totally. And that's important too. And some lenders are only licensed in a handful or one state. Some are licensed across the country. But that's really good. Here in California, obviously, we are one of the most, I don't know what you'd call it, stringent and require the most of any state, like as far as requirements and reciprocity. Like California, we think we're, when I say we, our local government thinks it's special and has the highest standard for everything. Wherever you're going to borrow money, though, I want to make sure that you understand what Chris just said. If I live in California and I'm buying a house in Ohio from a lender in Phoenix, they need to be licensed in Ohio. Does that make sense? So they need to be licensed where the property is, not even where they are, where you are. So I live in California. He lives in Arizona. I bought a lot of real estate in Ohio. His bank would have had to have been licensed in Ohio for that transaction to work.
So our particular bank, licensed Florida, California, Arizona, all over the place, also did a lot of business in Texas. No license needed. So that really does depend on the location of the borrowing activity, and California was our biggest nightmare from a regulation standpoint.
So do you think that conversation starts with when someone's inquiring with a lender, one of the first questions is, I want to buy a house in Texas. Does it require a license in Texas? And if so, are you licensed in Texas?
If you're not working in your local region, you're investing in Texas, and you live in California, I would be looking around for lenders there and inquiring to see, hey, what's your licensing like? You know, I'm an out-of-state investor. I'm not going to live there. That's a huge factor here. My bank could actually handle owner-occupied stuff, but most hard money lenders don't. There's regulation related to that. Most places you can do investment borrowing and your lender doesn't need to be licensed, but as a borrower, I'm going to have my money and earnest money on the line, contingent, and hoping that my lender performs. The license gives me peace of mind as a borrower that they're going to show up with the money, and I'm not going to be on the day of closing without the money I need to close and risk losing my earnest money.
That's awesome. Let's wrap that there. In the next video, we're going to talk about what lenders are going to look at you for. So you now know what to look for in a lender. Now we're going to talk about what lenders are looking for in you. What's up? It's Cole and Chris again. So we're going to flip it now. We just got done talking in the last video. If you skipped it, go back and watch it on what you as a borrower should look for in a lender. Now, we've got a lender here. We're going to talk about what a lender looks for in a borrower. I'm going to start by asking you about both seasons. You were 25, as you shared in the first video, had recently foreclosed your own house and had no credit and still got money. So talk about, from a borrower's perspective, what some of the things that you had to show to get money. And then, as a lender yourself who has loaned out millions and millions of dollars to countless borrowers in the states that you're licensed to be lending in, what you look for in others. So that got wordy. What did they ask you to see, and what do you ask other people to show you?
So they first and foremost want to see a purchase contract. As we mentioned before, you need to have control.
Yep.
Purchase contract shows that you are paying what you say you're paying. That I needed to show that I had the money. If it was a $100,000 house and I want to borrow 70, they wanted to see that I had 30. But not only that, they wanted to see reserves. So it's a 6-month loan. I think I'll be done with my project in 3 or 4 months. That 6 months of payment's going to cost some extra money. And then what about the renovation? I was not really risky when I started. I would borrow, 60, 70%, and then I'd keep the money earmarked in reserve to have all of my renovation and reserves for 9 months of the project so that I was really careful not to lose anything. So reserves was another big thing. And then any other projects that I'd done. Can I show that I've done some of these fix and flips before? How did my projects do? How long did they take? So I ended up putting together a resume that showed, hey, here's 5 or 6 deals I've done in the last 6 months. Here's what I bought them at. Here's what I spent on the renovation. Here's what they sold at. So the more that I could prepare and present to the lender to show I knew what I was doing, just took my level of professionalism up.
This makes me want to add a point. The hardest deal you'll ever do in your career is the first one. The second hardest deal you ever do in your career is the second one. Now let's talk about money. The hardest dollar you'll ever raise is the first one. So Chris just said, once I had 6 months of transactions, maybe 6 to 10 deals under my belt, getting the money was easy. Yet you still had to get money for the first one. So I don't want anyone watching this right now to say, well, lucky for you, Chris, you've done deals now and people give you money. I've never done one. Remember, at 25 years old, he hadn't done an investment property either and had foreclosed on his own personal residence. So when people ask me this question, Cole, how do I raise money? Before I've got that resume, I'm going to look right in the camera, look you right in the eye and tell you, the more deals you've done, the easier it gets, for sure. Yet we all have to raise that very first dollar. So here's what I'm going to say. We've already touched on it. Chris really did a great job of explaining that they're going to look at the deal. The less money you have in, the higher they're in, the higher leverage, the more they're going to charge you. And the reality is they'll kind of lend on anything if the numbers make sense, regardless of what your personal assets are, income, credit score, etc. But check this out. What I have found personally matters the most for a beginner is your knowledge. If you sit down at Chris's bank and say, I want to borrow money, and he says, how many deals have you done? And you say, none. And he says, okay, what's your experience in real estate? Then you say, I watched a lot of Flip This House on TV, every season, every episode. He's going to shake your hand and say, thanks for nothing, peace. But when you say that you've spent the time to to train and have been mentored, and you can have the conversation of knowing the vernaculars like ARV is after repair value and LTV is loan to value, and you can articulate and have a conversation, the fact that you know what you're talking about does wonders. Because if every single person had to have deals to get money, then guess what? No one would have ever borrowed money in the world because nobody's born having done deals. So when Chris talks about at the 6-month mark having had those few deals under his belt, it gets way easier, but he still had to get money for those first 6 deals, right?
Yep. Yeah, and you hit a great point there. The vocabulary is very crucial. So the more you can learn and show up and sound like you know what you're doing, the better. Kind of that saying, act as if. While you can't mislead or lie to the lender and say, oh, I've done 20 of these deals, give me your best deal, the terminology and how you approach a new lender can really make a big difference in the rate you get quoted. When we can tell somebody's just fresh off the street, they don't know anything about what's going on, and they call and say, what's the price for, this loan or something, and they're not even using the proper lingo, that's how you're going to get a retail type price. As opposed to if you call and say, hey, I'm working on this deal, I'm shopping a few lenders, what's the best price you can do on this loan? That's how you're going to get a realistic, we're not going to come and aim on the high side. We're going to tell you, hey, this is about the range you're going to be in. As a lender, I generally answer an inquiry with a range. Hey, it's going to be between 9 and 12% and 2 to 4 points. I'm taking your temperature. If you go, oh my God, 12 points or 12% and 4 points, that's insane. I've got 8 and 2. Oh, well, send the deal in because it depends, and that's my salesman hat as a lender. I want to get the top rate and the top fee that I can, but you knowing how to approach the conversation is going to make a big difference on where you get quoted.
In the next video, we'll talk about, he keeps talking about rates and points. What is all that? I think I touched on that in the first video, but we'll break that down in the next video as he's using the language now, and you're like, whoa, slow down. What's a point? What's a rate? We'll talk about that next. But while we're still on this subject of what a lender looks for in a borrower, something I wanted to point out that he just talked about, that flexibility, is unique to hard money and private money. Bank of America has what they call loan products, and they've got a box that's this big, and you either fit in it or you don't. And if you fit in it, that's what you get. You can literally right now Google what interest rates are, and they are determined by the Federal Reserve, and it is what it is. Then depending on the deal and your credit score, that lender, based off of what the interest rates are, will add to it, right, to make more money, like you said. But you're not going to be able to negotiate with Bank of America. Here's your income, here's your credit score, here's the loan product you fit in, and that's the end of it. With Chris, he says that as a salesman and wanting to be profitable, he's got a Lamborghini to pay for and his own plane and everything else. He wants to be profitable. But at the same time, if he has an educated investor who's shopping saying, whoa, 12% interest on the money I'm borrowing and 4 points of the total loan value, I'm giving you some of what you're about to learn in the next lesson. That's insane. I just hung up with homeboy who's going to give me 8 and 2. Now Chris says, all right, I got someone who knows what they're doing, so I'm going to have to be more competitive with my rate. So he can, on the fly, offer you a different interest rate. That's unique to this industry, to this particular type of lender versus, again, from here I can see a Chase Bank. Right there, I could literally walk to it in 3 minutes. They're non-negotiable. This is their loan product. You qualify for it or you don't. So not that this has anything necessarily to do with a lender shopping you, but that's just good FYI to know that in the creative financing world, it's all negotiable. So back to, again, we asked what a lender is going to look for in you. Obviously, deal history and experience is valuable. However, we don't all start that way. Chris just got saying being able to speak the language, know the terms, and have an articulate conversation is something that weighs heavy on whether you get the money or not, how much you're going to pay for it. Maybe with the deal or some of the other stuff, what are some of the things that when the person watching this video picks up the phone to ask for money for the first time, what are some of the things they can expect to have to present or some of the things that lender will ask for? Some of the other things you haven't already shared.
Yeah, so one of the main things, the biggest question in my head as a lender is, what are you doing with it? It's one thing to say, hey, here's a $200,000 property. I'm going to pay $180,000. Well, that's pretty close to the top. Do you need my money to get you across until you can refi with Chase because you're going to hold this thing as a rental? That's why you're paying a little closer to market price? Or are you knocking it down because you're going to rebuild a new house? Or are you going to paint and carpet and take it out as a fix and flip? Your game plan should be as defined and clear as can be, because lenders always want to know, okay, this guy's got an idea, is he realistic or not? We get a good idea of what realistic is because we have to understand $50,000 condos to $5 million buildings. And we know, all right, guys who are veterans in this industry, in this market, they're doing X, Y, and Z in this neighborhood. If you call up and say, oh, I'm going to add a second story and it's going to have, flamingos hanging off the side, I'm probably not as interested in lending.
Not even for the flamingos?
Depends.
Yeah, okay. As far as any last second thoughts on what a lender's looking for in a borrower, what last piece of guidance do you have again for people who are out there who are going to start raising money for deals?
One last thing that we should probably touch on is, as a lender, the main thing I'm thinking about is protecting my money. If I lose money, I'm out of business. There's no way to survive and keep growing if I'm losing money. So the main thing from start to finish in an interaction between me as a lender and you or anybody else as a borrower is red flags. Where's an inconsistency? Where are you misleading me? Where are you lying to me? It's not a pessimistic outlook. It's a self-preservation mindset. So I've got to go after it, and I'm looking. Everything you tell me, I'm keeping track of. Whether it's my employees in a lending CRM, or it's me if it's a smaller lender just having a conversation. I want to see that if you say, hey, I'm closing on this on next Friday, and that's November 15th. I want to see your contract says November 15th. So anywhere that there's inconsistencies there, I'm paying attention. If you tell me the property's worth 200 and I underwrite it and it's worth 150, it's not a good start. So you just want to make sure it's back to that clear communication that you're telling me and managing expectations all the way, and knowing that as a lender, I'm paying attention to things that you may not even think matter.
Yeah, and without getting too romantic about it, when you're dating somebody who you want to be in a long-term relationship with, if you start that relationship off on lies, like you're taking a beautiful woman out and you're like, oh yeah, I'm a hedge fund manager on Wall Street, and you're not, you're a general manager of Target, that's not a good way to have a long-term relationship. And although you're maybe not marrying your lender, in business you actually kind of are. And so what Chris is really emphasizing here from someone who is a lender is don't lie to him, don't exaggerate things, because you want this to be a long-term relationship, and it's his business to scrutinize every detail you're sharing with him. If you tell him, hey Chris, I need 200 grand to buy $1 million property, he's not like, okay, here's my checkbook, who do I make that 200 grand out to? He's going to try to find a reason why it's not worth 200 grand based on comps or things that are going on or zoning laws or whatever. So I think that's really important to not try to trick a lender into wanting to give you money, because they're in the business of, he calls it underwriting. That's basically a fancy way of saying examining you in the deal to make sure that everything you're saying is true. And in this particular arena, they examine the deal more than you. Like he said, you don't need to show them your credit necessarily, or your income statements, or your tax returns, or things like that. But they are going to be taking a look at you through a magnifying glass, because he said a good point. He's giving you his freaking money. He'd go out of business real quick if every time he did that, they lost it.
One last point on that, if you really want to impress the lender, undersell your deal. Hey, I'm paying 150, it's worth 200. I underwrite it and think it's worth more like 220. Hey, Cole's conservative. I like this guy. I want to do business with a guy who's not, thinking the whole world is rainbows and unicorns. He's on the conservative side. I'm going to make money with that guy. That's where I want my money.
That's a huge tip. What we're going to talk about in the next video is all these terms he's using. Rates, points, all of that. How much does hard money cost versus traditional? We're going to talk about that in the next video. up? It's Cole and Chris again. So, if you've been watching the last couple of videos, Chris has been freaking bringing it. If you're the type of person that skips around, stop the video right now. Go back to the beginning of the section with Chris because it's all been building. And what we're going to talk about right now are some of the lending terms and the different vocabulary or acronyms or things that we use in the real estate marketplace. And it's only going to make sense if you have the context of what we just got done teaching. With that being said, to reintroduce Chris, if you're just joining us again, go back and watch it. He actually has started and owns his very own hard money lending bank that he actually just sold on Friday, which is a huge success for him. That being said, we've talked a lot in the previous videos about what a lender's looking for in a borrower and what we as a borrower should be looking for in a lender. And we've said things like rates, points, leverage, skin of the game, etc., down payment, whatever. So we're just going to get pretty technical in this video to talk about what the terminology is, because Chris said one of the number one things a lender is going to be listening to from you on determining whether they want to lend you money or not is if you sound like you know what you're talking about, is if you are using words that are within the industry standard, like, hey, how many points do you charge and at what rate? Or are you like, hey, how much is the, what did you say? What's the price? What's the price for your loan? They're going to be like, what do you mean price? What price for what? So we're going to just break that down. Let's just start from the top. Let's start with fair money. That changes, obviously. So as a lender, what's fair money? In the sense, when you give me money for a deal, what is fair for you to charge me?
Sure. So our bank's been involved in Florida, Texas, Arizona, Nevada, California, and Washington State. So I've kind of some snapshot info across the country. Different markets are different prices. Arizona's been 18% for 25 years. It's just been the way it is. California's been 8 to 12%. And your low prices out here have been pushing east into Arizona, which is not good for me as a lender.
Yeah.
But
But good for me as a borrower.
yeah, guys in Arizona are celebrating these days because the pricing's been coming down the last couple of years. Texas, on the other hand, it's a 12 to 14% market, but 4 or 5 points is conventional. Whereas California, you're more like 2 or 3. Arizona's 18%. Maybe a point, maybe 2, maybe nothing. The latest pricing in Arizona is $13.9 and no fee.
So I'm going to stop you there and say, when he's using numbers 8 to 12 up to 18, what that is the interest of the money that you're borrowing for 12 months. It's called an annualized rate. So if he gives me $100,000 at 10%, that's $10,000. 10% interest of $100,000 is $10,000. So what my payment would be is that $10,000 divided by 12, assuming this is interest only, and that's what we're talking about. So that's what interest rate he's talking about. Here in California, he says kind of the standard has been 8 to 10, 8 to 12. Out in Arizona, it's as much as 18. Now he's also talking about points. He said 8 to 12%, maybe 4 points. Why don't you tell him what points means?
So points are a point, 1 percentage point on the loan amount. So if it's a $100,000 loan and you say 2 points, that's 2%, $2,000.
Right. So why they call it a point instead of a percent? Who knows? Somebody once upon a time decided that's what it'd be called.
Lending lingo. It's a little shorter than saying percentage points.
Yeah, that's
Just say
true.
point.
So if you are going to call a lender and they give you a quote of how much they charge you for their money, and they say, sometimes they do it even more, they abbreviate even more, and they just say 12 and 2. Hey, how much do you lend your money out? 12 and 2. What do you mean 12 and 2? You only lend for 2 hours a day between 12 and 2? No, 12% interest on the total loan amount for 12 months and 2 points just right on top. So if you borrow the money for 1 day, that 12% interest rate, you only paid 1 day's worth of, but the 2 points you paid in full. So that's one way that a lender like Chris can be guaranteed to make a minimum of X amount of dollars.
Yeah, so that brings up a couple other things we do. We usually have a minimum term or a prepayment term. So on a $1 million deal, we're always going to have a 3-month prepayment. So if I mobilize $1 million, I want at least 3 months of guaranteed interest before you pay it off. So if you need my money for a week, you're going to pay the 3 months interest because I don't want to move big chunks of money around and have them come back and forth. It costs me time, takes resources away from my investors, and the points are the bigger thing. Usually we'll have an option. I have an option 16% no fee or 12% and 2 points. you can do a math equation and figure out your equilibrium there. If you're going to be, a 90-day deal, it's going to make more sense to take a higher rate and less upfront fee. But if you're going to be in a longer term deal, maybe it costs a little bit more upfront, but I know it's going to be a 9 or 12-month deal, I'll take the lower interest rate.
Right, and so, like you said, the equilibrium, it's figuring out what's going to be the cheapest in the long run. If I'm only borrowing the money quick for like a flip, then I'm going to want to pay lower points, higher interest, because even if I had an 18% interest rate like in Arizona, but I only borrow the money for 90 days, I'm paying a small percentage of the 18% total. So that's awesome right there. LTV, I talked about in a different video, but what are fair LTVs in today's lending environment? So LTV is loan to value. House is worth $100,000. What percentage of the $100,000 will a hard money lender give somebody? So why don't you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, so that depends on the deal. Our rule of thumb has generally been 80%. If you'll put in 20% of the money, I'll give you the other 80%. We adjust that based on where the market is. When the market is really low, after the recession in 9, 10, 11, we were doing 80% all day because our pricing was so low. It was below replacement cost. I was pretty safe. If you don't pay and I get your house that in today's pricing is worth 100, you put in 20, I lent 80 and I get that house back for 80, I feel really good about that because it cost me 150 to replace it. As the markets heat up like they are out here in Southern California, I may dial the 80% down to 70 or even 65 because I want a better cushion in case you don't perform.
Right. So, again, is that purchase price? What about if the house needs some repairs too? How then do you maybe get involved with that?
That's a great distinction. So there's loan to value LTV. There's also loan to cost LTC. We generally lend on the lower of LTV or LTC. So if the property's worth 500 and you're paying 400, I'm probably going to give you 80% of your loan to cost rather than the loan to value. Because if I did 80% of loan to value, I'm giving you 400 of 500. Yeah. Then you don't have any skin in the game. If you screw it up, I end up taking back a property. Now, there should still be enough to cover me, but generally lenders are going to want to think of them first, you second. They're going to go off the lower of the two.
Now, it's been pretty obvious, but just in case someone's had a long day watching this right now or, has had a few cervezas, talk about skin in the game. You've referenced skin in the game in all 4 of our videos so far. What is that as a lender? What is skin in the game, and why do you want to see your borrower have skin in the game?
Skin in the game is to me, one of the biggest terms or factors in real estate. When I was getting started with very little money of my own, people kept telling me, well, we want you to have skin in the game. That means they want me to have money in it or me to have pain if it doesn't work. Whether that's a personal guarantee or I've pledged some other asset or it's my money. People used to tell me, I don't care how much you're going to lose, I want it to mean a lot to you. So I could get in on $1 million deal with a wealthier partner. I had $20,000 in the deal. He had $980,000 in the deal. But he wanted to know if I lost that $20,000, it was a big problem for me. $20,000 to him didn't mean anything, but that's skin in the game. Meaningful money or otherwise in the game so that I can't walk away from the deal with no consequence.
And here's why that's important. When Chris says, that guy had 980 and Chris only had 20, so proportionately, Chris had almost nothing in compared to the other guy. But Chris is saying, for example, let's say that $20,000 meant everything to him. It's not that his partner's malicious and wants to see Chris hurt. He wants to make sure that when Chris goes to bed at night, he's thinking about that deal. When Chris is dreaming, he dreams about that deal. When he wakes up in the morning, he wakes up thinking about that deal. Because although 20,000 compared to 980 is not a lot, in this made-up example to Chris, because I know 20,000 is not a lot, but in starting off your career at 25, $20,000 might have been everything to you. And so for that guy to say, okay, I know that even though it's only 20 grand, and to the wealthy guy, who cares about 20 grand? But to Chris, it's literally everything he's got. Now I know that guy's going to work his ass off to make sure this deal goes swimmingly, because if he loses that 20,000, it's going to kill him even more than if I lose a 980.
Yep. And that was big because now those tables have turned. Now I'm the lender. I want to make sure the borrower has skin in the game. So now I may be putting the 980 next to your 20. I want to make sure that if you lose the 20, it hurts.
It's just about motivation. It's just, can you imagine if you borrowed $1 million of Chris's dollars, had zero of your own dollars in, got into a project and said, oh man, the city zoning's taking longer than I thought it would. Oh man, it's just more work than I thought it was. I thought it was as easy as the TV shows make it look, and I actually have to show up and yell at contractors, this and that. I'm over it. And you just walk away. What did you really lose other than time? Nothing. What does Chris lose? $1 million. So
Worse than that, I've now inherited your project. And that's what I don't want to do as a lender. I'm not in the business of lending out money to inherit projects that I have to go finish.
right. So that's what skin in the game means. We talked about points. We talked about percentages. Is there any other terminology that if a newbie is on the phone with you, you're going to ask them that you think that it's important they know? Or have we covered everything for the most part?
You know, we've covered most of it. One thing that probably would help if you're going to be calling lenders is don't flip-flop the numbers. It's never 2 and 10. It's 10 and 2.
Right.
The bigger number is always going to be the interest rate. The smaller number is going to be the points and fees. You know, those little details don't sound like a lot, but that's how the lenders are assessing, is this a good guy to lend money to or not?
Now, I'm going to talk to maybe a percentage of the viewers that don't have that 20,000 in that made-up example and might not have any liquidity personally, right? You talked about using collateral. So does your bank allow that? Do you know if banks allow that? Do they say, hey, listen, Chris, I can't put a whole lot of money in this deal, but I own my own personal residence or I own this business or whatever, and I'll let you put a lien against it as collateral. So maybe talk a little bit about that as a way to get even more creative within the creative financing.
Yeah, sure. So as a hard money lender, you know, the box that we lend in, as you mentioned earlier, it's not this little box at B of A. It's, you know, we can write our own ticket. I've made loans before where I've put 100% of the money into the deal because there's other factors. You know, maybe the family owns some rental property or there's other things. That's called cross-collateralization. If I can put a lien against some other property or asset that you own, I'll be willing to give you money for this deal and you don't have to come up with any money. So it's just anything else that we can secure, you know, and make sure that you're going to pay me back by having, again, a pain point. If you don't pay me, you know, you don't want to lose the family's rental property because you didn't finish this flip.
Right, totally. Anything else we haven't covered that you think is important? Just as far as like terminology, rates, and all that?
You know, we kind of touched on ARV. I'm sure you've touched on it before.
Yeah.
But that's that after repaired value. That's a pretty big factor. LTV doesn't always reference ARV. So those three kind of all interact in their own way. The loan to cost, the loan to value, and the after repaired value. As is value is kind of what the LTV generally refers to, what it's worth today as opposed to after you do your work to it, what it could be worth.
So I'll expand on that again. We did talk about this on an earlier video, but maybe you watched it 3 weeks ago or skipped that one. Again, I don't know why in real estate we love our acronyms, but we certainly do. There's like 100 of them. And so what he just talked about, ARV, is after repair value. He said as is value is about the LTV, which is loan to value. So watch this. You find a house today. It's currently occupied, so it's not dilapidated, but they have animals in the house. There's some cat pee and some cat claw marks where the carpet's pulled up and shredded. The walls are dirty, dented. Maybe you have some mold in the corner of the bathroom, and the roof needs to be replaced. That house, as is, has a value just like that. Now you get that occupant out. You put in fresh carpet, fresh paint, get rid of the moldy walls, put on a new roof, put in an updated kitchen and bathrooms, and make it gorgeous. Guess what? It's worth a new number now, and that is the after repair value. And so we talked in a previous video about pulling comps. When your house is ugly and beat up, how do you know what it's going to be worth once it's beautiful and fixed up? What do you know what that spread is? To make sure that when you put money in, it's worth more than you bought it for and put it in, you look at the comps, and that's how you determine after repair value. So he said a great distinction is that knowing the difference between those numbers, they're going to lend on basically what your purchase price is, your as-is value, and not always, although some hard money lenders do, they'll give you 80% of ARV.
Yep.
And so I've worked with a fund who didn't necessarily care what I was buying it for or fixing it up for. They didn't really care. They were going to give me 80% of what it was going to be worth once it was sold. Now, they bought the property, and then they were the ones that paid the contractor, so they didn't give me the money and I ran to Mexico. They paid my contractors in those draws, so they controlled all the money, but they gave me 80% of the after repair value, which covered almost, not all, but almost the entire purchase price and repair cost. Have you ever done any of that type of lending?
Absolutely. So construction lending and lending on the ARV is obviously a higher risk to a lender, but there's different ways we can kind of control when the money gets released and where it goes to make sure, it's a few inspections, construction draws along the way. But yeah, hard money lending, we definitely play in the construction area and, get a little bit more creative when the deal calls for it.
Cool. Well, that's been a lot of terms. Hope you guys wrote that down. You might want to listen to this video 5 or 6 times, like right now, so that these terms are just right on the tip of your tongue, so that when you get in a conversation with a lender, again, you don't look like a total donkey, and Chris is on the other line like, what do you mean, what's the price? That you can say, hey, where are you at? And when Chris comes back because he wants to make money, he's like, oh yeah, I'm 14 and 5. You can be like, whoa, I just got off the phone with someone who's at 10 and 2. Now Chris is like, okay, this person knows what they're talking about. So, hope you enjoyed this one.